The ancient Cotharian city sprawled beneath the shadow of a colossal statue, its metal surface gleaming under the twin suns. Zelmar, now a venerable elder of 100 cycles, led a small group of young students through the city's winding streets toward the statue's base. The children, buzzing with youthful curiosity, cast glances up at the towering figure, a human in full battle armor, his face hidden beneath a polished visor. "You've heard the myths," Zelmar began, his voice a deep rasp that carried the weight of ages. "Stories passed down through generations about the humans, beings of legend who arrived in our darkest hour." One of the students, a brash young Cotharian named Jork, snickered. "My father says humans are just tales for children. No one's seen them in cycles. How could they have existed?" Zelmar paused, letting the moment hang in the air. He looked up at the statue, remembering. "Your father wasn't there," he said quietly, his tone laced with the gravity of someone who had lived through unimaginable loss. "But I was." The students fell silent, their skepticism waning as they began to sense there was something more to Zelmar's words than idle stories. The elder turned to face them, his ancient eyes gleaming with a mix of sadness and reverence. "This statue," he continued, gesturing to the towering figure, "is not a monument to myth. It is a tribute to the very beings who saved us from extinction." The children shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to believe him. Zelmar was known to be a relic of a past age, a time most of them couldn't comprehend. Yet there was something in his voice, an unshakable conviction that made them hesitate to dismiss him entirely. "There was a time when Cotharia was on the brink of destruction," Zelmar said, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing another world altogether. "Our people were still new to space travel. We had barely explored our own system when the cataclysm struck. Our moon, Patarak, destabilized and was on the verge of collapsing into our homeworld. We were powerless, helpless, and no other species came to our aid." The students' eyes widened, captivated despite themselves. Zelmar had their attention now, though none dared interrupt him. "We sent out pleas to every known race," Zelmar continued, his voice heavy with the memory of those desperate days. "But none responded with anything more than hollow words. Our technology was primitive, our fleet small. We could only watch as the end approached. That was when the humans appeared." He stopped for a moment, looking each student in the eye as if gauging their readiness to understand the gravity of his words. Jork, who had been the most skeptical, now stood quietly, his earlier arrogance melting away under Zelmar's unwavering stare. "They came in ships the likes of which we had never seen, vast, formidable, yet elegant in their design," Zelmar said, his voice softening as he recounted the awe of that moment. "They had no reason to help us. They owed us nothing, but they saved us. They moved with a purpose, organized in a way we could not comprehend. In a matter of days, they evacuated our entire population, transferring us to a world they had prepared for their own use, but gave to us instead." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the students, but none of them dared to speak aloud. Zelmar's eyes, sharp despite his age, fixed him in place. "Imagine that," Zelmar said, his voice growing quiet. "A species that could have looked the other way, but instead chose to save us, strangers to them, when no one else would." He turned to the statue once more, his voice barely above a whisper now. "They didn't ask for thanks. They didn't ask for tribute. They gave us a new beginning." Zelmar let his words sink in, then looked back at the students, their eyes wide and filled with awe. Even Jork had no words to offer. "The humans were real," Zelmar said, his tone firm, leaving no room for doubt. "And they were the reason you stand here today." The silence stretched as the students stood, transfixed by the weight of the elder's tale. Finally, Zelmar gestured for them to follow him further into the city. "But that," he added, with a glance back at the statue, "was only the beginning." The group walked on, the image of the human warrior etched into their minds as they prepared to hear the rest of Zelmar's incredible story. The sky above Cotharia had always been a deep crimson, but on the day the cataclysm began, It darkened into a choking black. Zelmar's voice quivered as he continued his tale, walking slowly through the streets as the students followed. They no longer whispered among themselves. They were gripped by the gravity of the story. Our people have always looked to the moon, Pateract, Zelmar said. It was a symbol of constancy, but then, without warning, it became our doom. The elder's eyes, usually steady and calm, flickered with the terror of that distant memory. The scientists had no explanation. One moment, the moon was stable, the next, it was cracking apart. Entire chunks of rock began to fall toward Cotheria, and we were powerless to stop it. The gravitational shift was pulling our planet apart, and we had no means to escape. The students imagined it. Cotheria breaking into pieces as their moon collapsed onto them, a world-ending disaster no one had prepared for. Zelmar could see the fear growing in their eyes, just as it had in his when he was their age, watching his people scramble in a vain attempt to survive. We weren't ready for something like that, Zelmar continued, his voice taking on a haunted tone. Our ships were crude, incapable of long-distance travel. The Council had sent distress signals to the neighboring systems, begging for aid, but none came. Not until the humans. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. The students were hanging on every word now, the disbelief that had initially clouded their expressions gone. They arrived in ships that blotted out the sky, Zelmar said, his voice reverent, sleek, silent, powerful, yet carrying a kind of hope we had never seen before. They called themselves the guardians of lost causes, and in that moment, we were as lost as a species could be. One of the students, Marak, dared to ask, why did they help us? Why risk themselves for us? Zelmar smiled faintly, though it was tinged with sadness. That's the question, isn't it? Why save a people who couldn't offer anything in return? I asked myself the same thing as I stood on the evacuation platforms. Watching their fleets move with such precision, it seemed almost unnatural. Their technology was beyond anything we could dream of, machines that terraformed, ships that moved whole cities, even ecosystems. With ease, he took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. The humans didn't just save our lives. They gave us a new world, a planet they had shaped for themselves. They dismantled entire cities they had built and gave the resources to us so that we could start over. They stabilized our atmosphere, brought our flora and fauna to safety, and made sure no life was lost. The students were silent, their young faces filled with awe. Jorik, who had been the most doubtful, now looked up at the statue of the human warrior with a newfound respect. The enormity of what Zelmar described was starting to sink in. I stood among my people, watching as the last of our cities were loaded onto human ships. I will never forget the sight of their fleet. A silver armada cutting through the blackness of space, like gods come to rescue us from oblivion. Zelmar's gaze drifted upward, as if he could still see the ships hovering above Cotheria. They moved with a precision that made everything seem effortless, but the truth is, they sacrificed much to save us. The planet they gave us was meant for them, their own colony, but they handed it over without hesitation. When I asked one of their commanders why, he simply said, because we can. The students exchanged glances, stunned by the simple explanation. They didn't want anything from us, Zelmar said, turning to face them again. No payment, no tribute. They didn't even stay long enough for us to thank them properly. They simply left us with the tools to survive and moved on. But their gift, their world, became our salvation. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried the weight of the story's significance. That is why we remember them, not just for saving us, but for giving us the chance to rebuild, to start again. Zelmar let the silence linger for a moment, then gestured toward the distant horizon, where the twin suns were beginning to dip. But the humans did not leave us alone. They stayed long enough to ensure our survival. And when a new darkness came upon the galaxy, they stood with us once more. With those words, he turned and led the students onward, the statue of the human warrior fading behind them as they ventured deeper into the city, toward the next chapter of their history. Zelmar's step slowed as he neared the outskirts of the city, where the rolling plains stretched endlessly under the twin suns. The students followed, now silent in anticipation, knowing the elder was approaching the darkest chapter of his tale. His voice, once steady, had turned somber. "The humans gave us life," he said, his eyes gazing into the distance. "But they also showed us what it means to fight for survival." A new, menacing threat had arisen in the galaxy, far beyond the borders of what the Cotherians, or even the humans, could patrol. They were known as the Gorthan, a ruthless race of conquerors that left nothing but ash in their wake. Zelmar's face tightened as he recalled the early reports. Entire colonies wiped out, fleets obliterated before they could even signal for help. The Gorthan came without warning, without mercy. Zelmar continued, his voice dropping to a near growl. "We had never faced anything like them. No one had. Their ships were like shadows, moving faster than any known technology. Their weapons were designed not just to kill, but to erase. Entire cities, whole civilizations, gone as if they had never existed." The students exchanged uneasy glances. The stories of the Gorthan were still whispered among the Cotherian people, but to hear it from someone who had witnessed their cruelty was different. It was terrifying. "The humans were the first to respond," Zelmar said, his expression softening despite the grim subject. "As soon as they learned of the threat, they rallied every ally they had. Their ships, what was left of them after saving our world, formed an armada. We joined them, sending our best cruisers to fight under their command. I was there, aboard the cruiser Arion, standing on the bridge as we prepared for the greatest battle of our time." Zelmar paused, the memory of that fateful day etched deeply in his mind. The humans were relentless. I had never seen such determination. They were fighting not just to defend us, but to protect every species in the galaxy from annihilation. The battle against the Gorthan was apocalyptic. Waves of human and Cotherian ships met the invaders in the cold vacuum of space. Zelmar described the sheer magnitude of destruction as both sides tore into each other. Explosions lit up the void, entire ships vanishing in an instant. Yet the humans fought on. Zelmar remembered looking to his human commander, a man named General Hartley, and seeing a fire in his eyes that no Gorthan weapon could extinguish. "We won that day," Zelmar said, his voice carrying both pride and sorrow. "But the cost was unimaginable. The humans lost nearly everything. Their fleet was shattered, their colonies vulnerable. They had sacrificed themselves for a galaxy that never truly understood their strength, their resolve." Zelmar's expression darkened, but the worst was yet to come. The students leaned in closer, sensing the turning point in the story. Zelmar's voice became quieter, more intense. "The great betrayal," he muttered, the words heavy with pain. "It wasn't the Gorthan that nearly wiped out humanity. It was one of the very races they had saved." Zelmar's jaw clenched as he remembered the treachery that had shaken the galaxy. One of the great council races, a supposed ally, had secretly leaked the locations of human colonies to the enemy. It was an act of cowardice and greed, born from fear of the Gorthan and jealousy of humanity's strength. The students recoiled in disbelief. "The Gorthan launched a final assault," Zelmar said, his voice thick with bitterness. "But this time, they didn't attack with fleets. They used antimatter torpedoes, weapons designed to destroy entire worlds. Humanity's colonies, their homeworlds, gone in an instant. Less than 1 million survived." The silence among the students was profound, the weight of the betrayal crushing their earlier sense of wonder. Zelmar's eyes burned with the memory of those lost. "And that," Zelmar said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was when humanity made their final decision. They would leave this galaxy forever, to hunt down the Gorthan in their own domain. But before they left, they made one last promise. 'We will return,' they said, 'and when we do, justice will follow.'" The students could hardly breathe as Zelmar finished this part of his tale. There was no need for embellishment. The raw truth of the betrayal, the near extinction of the humans, was enough to chill them to their cores. Zelmar's gaze turned once again to the horizon, and so they departed, leaving us with the knowledge that somewhere out there they were still fighting. But their departure wasn't the end. They left behind one final legacy, one last gift that would shape our future forever. He turned and gestured for the students to follow him further, toward the heart of the city. Zelmar led the students into the heart of the capital city, its towering spires glinting in the afternoon light. As they walked, the students marveled at the grand architecture, at the advanced technology woven into every building and street. They had always been told that the city was a testament to the Cotharian spirit. Yet now, after hearing Zelmar's story, they saw it in a different light. This city was built upon the ashes of our old world, Zelmar said, his tone quieter, as though sharing a secret. But it would not exist without the humans. The students exchanged puzzled glances, uncertain of his meaning. They had heard stories of the humans saving their ancestors, of giving them a new home. But the way Zelmar spoke now suggested there was more to the tale. Zelmar stopped before an unassuming plaza in the city center. At its heart stood a monument, a tall, metallic statue of a human figure. The students had passed it many times before without giving it much thought, but now, in the light of Zelmar's story, it seemed to radiate a new significance. The elder's eyes softened as he gazed up at the statue. "This is not just a symbol of gratitude," Zelmar explained. "It marks the entrance to something much more important." With a flick of his wrist, Zelmar activated a hidden panel embedded in the ground. The students gasped as the plaza itself began to shift, stone slabs sliding aside to reveal a long, descending stairwell. Zelmar gestured for them to follow. The air grew cooler as they descended, and the students felt an almost tangible weight pressing down on them. Zelmar's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "After the great betrayal, after humanity's exodus from our galaxy, they left us one final gift, a vault. Inside are technologies and resources beyond anything we could have imagined. They gave us the tools to rebuild not just our world, but our civilization." The stairway ended in a massive, dimly lit chamber. At its center stood a massive structure, a gleaming, sealed vault door. It was made of some unknown alloy, its surface unmarred by time, even after all these cycles. The students stared in awe, speechless in the presence of such an artifact. "I've never shown this to anyone," Zelmar said, his voice solemn. "Not even the council knows what truly lies beneath the city. The humans entrusted us with this vault because they believed that one day we would need it." A student finally found the courage to speak. "Why haven't we opened it?" Zelmar smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Because the humans gave us more than technology. They gave us a choice. They believed in our ability to stand on our own, to thrive without their direct intervention. The vault is not a crutch. It is a beacon of hope. It will remain sealed until the time is right." The students looked around, their young minds racing with questions, with awe, and with newfound reverence for the humans. They had come expecting a history lesson, a tale of an ancient species, but what they had received was something much deeper, an understanding of the unbreakable bond between Cotharia and the mysterious humans who had saved them. Zelmar's gaze lingered on the vault for a moment longer before he led the students back up the stairs, into the warm light of the city. He could sense the change in them, the way their perception had shifted. They were no longer just curious children. They were the next generation, the stewards of the legacy left by humanity. As they emerged into the plaza once again, Zelmar turned to face the statue of the human. His old, weathered face softened, and he whispered the same words he had spoken many times over the years. "Thank you, old friends." The students stood in silence, watching the elder, feeling the gravity of the moment. They didn't need to ask any more questions. They understood now that they were part of something much larger, that they walked in the shadow of giants. Zelmar straightened, turning to look out over the bustling city. "We watch and we wait, and one day, when the time is right, humanity will return, and we will be ready." With that, Zelmar began to walk back toward the city's heart, his steps slow but purposeful. Behind him, The students followed, their young faces filled with a mix of awe and determination. The lesson was over, but the story was far from finished. They had been given a glimpse of their true legacy and the responsibility that came with it.